If your grocery bill has felt strangely unpredictable lately, you are not imagining it. One week, a basic staple looks normal, and the next it jumps just enough to make you pause, adjust, and quietly spend more. That is usually how food inflation works in real life. Not as one dramatic event, but as a slow financial leak inside ordinary shopping trips. And the problem is that families rarely get much warning. Transport costs rise. A harvest gets disrupted. A factory slows down. Packaging gets more expensive. Fuel moves up. Then the most ordinary items on your list start behaving like luxuries with a loyalty card. Smart families tend to respond in a very unremarkable way. They do not panic buy. They do not clear shelves. They simply start paying closer attention to a small group of low-cost basics that store well, stretch across multiple meals, and become far more valuable the moment prices move again. What matters here is not hoarding. It is timing. Buying a few extra essentials while they are still manageable can protect a budget later, when those same foods cost 10, 20, sometimes 30% more. And the most useful items are rarely glamorous. In fact, they are usually the foods people walk right past because they seem too plain to be strategic. That is exactly why they matter. Rice is one of the clearest examples. It is rarely exciting, but it is one of the most efficient foods in the store. A basic bag of white rice can stay usable for years if stored properly, and a relatively cheap purchase can become the base for dozens of meals. Fried rice, rice bowls, soups, side dishes, simple casseroles, even stretched meat meals where the rice carries half the plate. This is where the math starts to matter. A large bag of rice often delivers servings for just a few cents each, while convenience versions cost several times more by weight. Microwave pouches, seasoned cups, and ready-made grain blends sell speed and packaging, not real value. You are often paying 3 to 5 times as much for the same ingredient with less flexibility. Businesses know rice is a staple people rely on, which makes it vulnerable to steady price creep. Small increases barely get noticed when they happen in stages. But over a year, the difference adds up. Buying one extra bag while prices are stable is not dramatic. It is just smart budgeting. And rice has another advantage. It pairs with almost anything. If meat gets expensive, rice helps stretch smaller portions. If fresh produce is limited, rice still gives structure to a meal. It is not flashy, but it is financially dependable. And that matters a lot more than looking interesting in the pantry. Dry beans work the same kind of magic, but from the protein side. Black beans, kidney beans, pinto beans, navy beans, they are some of the cheapest protein sources most households can buy. And unlike fresh meat, they do not punish you with a ticking clock in the refrigerator. A 1-pound bag can produce multiple family meals for a fraction of the cost of ground beef or chicken breast. In many stores, dry beans still come in at a cost per serving that makes most packaged protein look slightly absurd. And once you season them properly, they do far more than just fill space on a plate. They become chili, burrito-filling soup, rice bowls, stews, mashed spreads, or a meat extender that quietly cuts a dinner bill without anyone filing a formal complaint. The business logic is simple. When animal protein rises, shoppers look for substitutes. That extra demand eventually pushes bean prices up too, especially canned options and trendier varieties. Dry beans usually remain the better value because you are not paying for water, canning, and branding. Yes, they take planning. That is exactly why many people avoid them. But avoiding a cheap staple because it needs soaking is one of the more expensive modern habits. For families trying to stay ahead of food inflation, dry beans are less a sacrifice and more a quiet advantage. Lentils deserve their own place because they solve the main complaint people have about beans: time. Lentils cook faster, often without soaking, and they still offer the same basic financial benefit: low-cost, shelf-stable protein that can stretch a meal far beyond what expensive meat can do on its own. They work especially well in soups, curries, stews, and pasta sauces. A small amount can make a dish feel heartier without announcing itself. That matters for budgets, because one of the easiest ways to cut food costs is not by eliminating familiar meals. It is by extending them intelligently. And lentils are often overlooked because they do not have the same pantry reputation as rice or pasta, which is useful. Less hype usually means less packaging nonsense and fewer premium markups. You are buying a basic ingredient, not a lifestyle identity. Financially, lentils help in two ways. First, they lower the cost per meal. Second, they reduce the need for expensive last-minute shopping because they are always there, ready to become dinner. That may sound small, but avoiding one or two emergency takeout nights per month can save more than the lentils cost for the entire season. They also tend to be less ultra-processed than many convenience meals marketed as budget solutions, which is a rare case where the cheaper option is often the simpler one. Then there is pasta, one of the most dependable grocery survivors in the modern budget crisis. Even after repeated price increases, pasta is still usually cheap enough to remain a core filler for millions of households. And unlike many low-cost foods, it does not feel like a compromise. People actually want to eat it. That matters more than budget advice sometimes admits. A cheap food only helps if your household will actually use it. Pasta clears that test easily. It can be turned into quick dinners, cold leftovers, baked dishes, soups, or stretched meals using a small amount of meat, canned fish, frozen vegetables, beans, or just oil and seasoning. The pricing trap here is not usually plain pasta. It is what sits around it. Single-serve cups, refrigerated versions, stuffed varieties, premium shapes, and heavily branded sauces can quietly multiply the total cost of what should have been a low-cost meal. A basic box and a simple homemade or store-brand sauce often cost dramatically less. Pasta also helps smooth out inflation pressure because it stores well. You can buy it when it is on sale, keep it for months, and use it when prices elsewhere get ugly. That flexibility is a financial buffer. And in uncertain times, buffers are worth more than culinary excitement. Oats may be one of the least appreciated defensive foods in the entire store. They are inexpensive, shelf-stable, useful for more than breakfast, and surprisingly effective at replacing more expensive convenience foods. A large container of oats can produce weeks of meals for less than the cost of a few branded cereal boxes or breakfast bars. And that comparison matters. Many packaged breakfast products are basically a tax on exhaustion. They are sold to busy households as time savers, but they often cost far more per serving while doing less to keep people full. Oats, by contrast, can become hot cereal, overnight oats, baked bars, pancakes, muffins, smoothie add-ins, or a cheap extender in meatloaf and baking. The industry likes to make oats look premium when possible. Protein oat cups, flavored sachets, fitness branding, tiny portions in expensive packaging. But plain oats remain one of the best values in the aisle. You can flavor them yourself for a fraction of the cost. And because they are so adaptable, they reduce dependence on pricier breakfast foods that tend to rise quickly during inflation. Eggs, cereal, bakery items, and grab-and-go snacks can all jump fast. Oats give you a stable fallback. Quietly, that is how smart grocery planning works. You build options before you need them. Peanut butter is another item that looks ordinary until you compare what it delivers to what it costs. It is calorie-dense, protein-rich, shelf-stable before opening, and useful in breakfasts, sandwiches, sauces, snacks, baking, and emergency meals. Few foods are this convenient without needing refrigeration on day one. For families watching every dollar, peanut butter solves a very practical problem. It can turn cheap bread, oats, bananas, apples, or crackers into something much more filling. That means fewer moments when someone raids the kitchen an hour later, looking for a second meal disguised as a snack. The trap here is branding and formulation. Natural versions, flavored versions, individual squeeze packs, premium nut blends, and high-design jars can make a simple staple cost 2 or 3 times more. In many cases, a basic jar does the same job perfectly well. There is also a useful inflation lesson here. Foods with a long shelf life and broad appeal tend to become more important when budgets tighten. That demand can push prices up fast. So if peanut butter is already a regular item in your house, waiting until everyone else leans on it is usually the more expensive move. And unlike a lot of snack foods, it actually earns its pantry space. Canned tuna sits in a similar category, dependable, compact, and far more strategic than it looks. Fresh seafood can become painfully expensive very quickly, and even fresh chicken or deli meat often costs far more per serving than canned tuna. But a few cans in the pantry can become sandwiches, salads, pasta dishes, rice bowls, casseroles, or emergency lunches with almost no notice. This matters because protein is usually where grocery budgets start to strain. People can absorb a small increase on pasta or onions. They really notice it when the meat section turns hostile. Canned tuna gives households a way to reduce that pressure without relying entirely on beans or eggs. The pricing catch is that tuna is vulnerable to several cost drivers at once: fuel, fishing costs, processing, canning, and transport. So when supply chains get noisy, tuna often follows. Buying a few extra cans when prices are reasonable can make sense, especially if your family already uses it. The smarter move is to watch unit price carefully. Pouches, flavored versions, and branded convenience packs often carry a steep markup over standard cans. You are paying for portability and marketing. The fish is not suddenly giving a TED Talk. Canned chicken is less celebrated, but from a budget perspective, it deserves more respect. Fresh chicken is useful, but it is also vulnerable to spoilage, freezer space limits, and sudden price swings. Canned chicken gives you a shelf-stable backup that can step in when fresh meat is overpriced or unavailable. It works in soups, sandwiches, casseroles, dips, pasta dishes, tacos, and quick skillet meals. Is it glamorous? No, but glamour is expensive, and dinner is still due at 6. This is one of those items people often ignore until there is a disruption. Then shelves thin out quickly because shoppers realize they want protein that does not need immediate cooking or careful storage. By then, the price has usually moved too. The business side is straightforward. Shelf-stable proteins offer convenience insurance. That insurance becomes more valuable during uncertainty, which means manufacturers and retailers have room to raise prices without much resistance. Used occasionally, canned chicken can help you avoid a more expensive fresh meat purchase or a last-minute takeout decision. That is the key. Not every smart grocery buy has to be delicious on its own. Some of them matter because they prevent worse financial decisions later. Eggs are a little different because they are not as shelf-stable, but they still belong on this list when they are available at a reasonable price. Even after periods of major price volatility, eggs often remain one of the cheapest protein sources per serving compared with most meat products, especially if you use them flexibly. Breakfast is the obvious use, but smart families use eggs far beyond breakfast. Omelets, fried rice, baking, egg salad, pancakes, simple dinners, or adding 1 or 2 eggs to stretch a meal that would otherwise need more meat. In budget terms, eggs are not just protein, they are meal glue. And because they are so versatile, they help households adapt when other foods spike. If bacon gets expensive, eggs still work. If deli meat jumps, egg salad steps in. If dinner feels thin, a couple of eggs can make it feel complete. Of course, eggs can be unpredictable. Disease outbreaks, feed costs, and supply disruptions can send prices upward fast. That is why the smart approach is not blind loyalty. It is paying attention. When eggs are reasonably priced, they are one of the best values in the store. When they become strangely expensive, they are a reminder of why having several backup staples matters in the first place. By now, you are probably noticing a pattern. The best protection is rarely a trendy superfood or a clever grocery hack. It is usually a plain, flexible ingredient that can do 3 or 4 jobs at once. And if you look back at your own shopping habits for a second, how many expensive purchases were really just replacements for basic planning? That is not a criticism. It is the trap. Modern grocery retail makes convenience feel cheap in the moment and expensive only after the receipt exists. Families who get ahead of that pattern are not being extreme. They are just refusing to pay a premium for disorganization. And this is where some of the most overlooked foods become the most useful. Potatoes are a classic example. They remain one of the cheapest ways to create a filling meal, and they are far more versatile than their humble reputation suggests. Baked, roasted, mashed, pan-fried, added to soups, turned into hash, stretched into casseroles, or used to bulk up stews, potatoes do a lot of work for very little money. They also compare well against heavily processed side dishes. Boxed potato mixes, frozen fries, seasoned microwave trays, and prepared deli sides often cost dramatically more per pound than plain potatoes. And in many cases, you are paying extra for water, oil, packaging, and someone else adding salt with confidence. Potatoes also store reasonably well if kept in the right conditions, which gives them an edge over more delicate produce. That lowers waste. And waste is one of the least discussed parts of grocery inflation. A cheap food that gets thrown away is expensive. A simple food that gets used fully is value. They also provide steady energy and feel more substantial than many snack-based stand-ins, which helps when the goal is to make meals satisfying enough to avoid extra spending later. Onions may be the least glamorous item here, but they are one of the most strategically important. Most savory meals begin with some form of flavor base, and onions are often the cheapest way to create it. Soups, stews, pasta sauces, skillet meals, beans, rice dishes, roasted trays, casseroles, almost everything improves with an onion. That matters because flavor is budget protection. When low-cost ingredients taste better, households are more willing to eat them repeatedly. And that reduces the temptation to spend more on restaurant meals, prepared foods, or expensive sauces trying to rescue bland cooking. The price of onions is usually low enough that people do not think about them until supply issues hit weather-sensitive produce. Then even a basic bag can climb enough to become annoying. Buying a little ahead when quality is good and prices are normal is one of the simplest ways to avoid that irritation. They also store better than many fresh vegetables, which makes them unusually useful in uncertain weeks. Not exciting, not photogenic, but deeply practical. Quite a few solid family meals start with the sound of an onion hitting a cutting board. That is not romance. That is cost control. Frozen vegetables are where smart shopping starts to feel almost unfair. They solve several expensive problems at once. They reduce spoilage, remove prep time, offer portion control, and often cost less per usable serving than fresh produce, especially when fresh vegetables are out of season or sold in large packs that partially rot in the crisper drawer. This is one of the grocery store's quieter illusions. Fresh looks virtuous, but frozen is often the better budget choice. You only use what you need. The rest waits patiently instead of turning into a soft green regret by Thursday. Retailers know many shoppers associate frozen foods with processed meals, so plain frozen vegetables often sit nearby, while the more expensive convenience versions grab the attention. Sauced blends, steam bags with seasoning, family skillet kits. Some are useful, but many carry heavy markups for very little added value. Basic frozen peas, broccoli, mixed vegetables, spinach, or corn can support dozens of meals at a low cost. They also make home cooking easier on tired days, which is financially important. The cheaper meal people are willing to cook is more valuable than the ideal meal they postpone until takeout wins. Flour is one of the oldest budget tools for a reason. It turns a kitchen from a place that assembles food into a place that actually produces it. Bread, pancakes, flatbreads, biscuits, muffins, dumplings, tortillas, roux, coatings, gravies, simple desserts. Flour does far more than many households remember. And in inflationary periods, that flexibility matters. Foods made from flour are often the first things families buy ready-made because they seem cheap enough. But over time, bakery items, wraps, pancake mixes, refrigerated doughs, and snack pastries usually cost far more than the basic ingredients behind them. This does not mean every household should suddenly become an enthusiastic home baker at dawn. It simply means that flour gives you options. And options are a form of financial resilience. It is also one of those products that can experience surprising price shifts when wheat markets, fuel costs, or weather problems tighten supply. Because it starts so cheap, people sometimes ignore those increases until they are paying noticeably more for every simple baked item in the store. A modest supply of flour can support a lot of low-cost meals, especially when paired with oil, sugar, oats, or eggs. Nothing dramatic, just practical independence from overpriced convenience. Sugar is less exciting, and it is certainly not the star of a healthy lifestyle brochure, but it remains a practical pantry staple for several reasons. It stores well, stays stable, supports baking, and helps with preserving homemade sauces and basic food preparation. In small amounts, it also turns plain low-cost ingredients into foods people actually want to eat. That last part matters. Budget food that no one enjoys is often fake savings. It gets ignored, replaced, or wasted. A little sugar in oatmeal, baking, homemade jam, bread, or simple desserts can make inexpensive ingredients feel usable rather than punitive. The price pattern is also worth watching. Sugar can remain stable for long periods, then rise when weather, energy, crop issues, or trade disruptions affect supply. Because it is usually cheap, small increases seem trivial, but they show up across many products at once, from baking supplies to packaged foods. The smart approach here is moderation and practicality. Keep enough for the household uses you actually have. Not because it is glamorous, but because it is functional. And if you bake even occasionally, buying sugar before broad food inflation moves through the entire baking aisle is usually the calmer move. Cooking oil may be the most important warning item on this list because it has a habit of moving fast when supply chains get stressed. Oils are tied to crops, weather, fuel, exports, processing, and global commodity markets. When something goes wrong, prices often react quickly, and households feel it immediately. That is because oil is not just one ingredient. It is infrastructure. It affects frying, roasting, baking, sautéing, dressings, marinades, and nearly every form of practical home cooking. Once oil gets expensive, making food at home becomes more expensive in quiet ways people do not always notice right away. And the alternatives are not always cheaper. Spray oils, flavored oils, tiny premium bottles, and prepared dressings can carry markups that make standard cooking oil look extremely efficient. Watching unit price here matters a lot. For many families, oil is one of those products that seems boring right up until the bottle runs low and the replacement costs 30% more than last time. That is why smart shoppers often keep an extra bottle on hand when prices are reasonable. Not to stockpile extravagantly, just to avoid being forced to buy at the worst possible moment. And that may be the larger pattern behind all of this. The households that handle food inflation best are usually not the ones chasing every deal or trying to outsmart the entire economy. They are the ones building quiet stability with basic foods that last, stretch, and work in real life. Rice, beans, lentils, pasta, oats, peanut butter. Canned proteins. Eggs when the price makes sense. Potatoes, onions, frozen vegetables, flour, sugar, and oil. None of these are exciting status purchases. That is precisely why they are so useful. They do not depend on trends, they depend on function. And function is what protects a budget when prices become erratic. Preparation does not need to look dramatic. It can be as simple as adding one extra staple to the cart this week, another next week, and slowly creating a pantry that gives your family more room to breathe. More options. Fewer expensive surprises. Less dependence on whatever the store decides to charge in a bad month. That kind of planning is not fear. It is maturity. It is the quiet confidence of knowing that when prices shift again, and they usually do, your household is not starting from zero. If this helped you think differently about your grocery spending, consider subscribing. And the next time a plain, inexpensive staple seems too boring to matter, it may be worth a second look. Those are often the foods doing the most work when money gets tight.